The scent of lilies, my husband's favorite flower, was so thick in the air it was suffocating. It was a sweet, cloying smell, the perfume of death trying to mask the raw, ugly scent of grief. My home, the one Richard and I had filled with 50 years of laughter and love, was now a funeral parlor, crowded with the dark, somber shapes of friends and family who had come to pay their last respects. They moved in hushed, reverent whispers, their hands gently touching my arm, their faces masks of practiced, sorrowful sympathy. My own heart felt like a hollowed-out cavern, a place where a great, roaring fire had just been extinguished, leaving behind nothing but cold, brittle ash. I was in a state of shock, moving through the motions of a hostess at the saddest party on earth, my body on autopilot, while my soul was still standing by his hospital bedside, holding his cooling hand. Then the murmuring stopped. A sudden sharp silence fell over the room, a silence so profound it was a physical blow. I looked up and saw my daughter, my Olivia, my own flesh and blood, standing in the archway of the living room. She was not dressed in mourning black. She was wearing a severe, dark gray suit, her hair pulled back in a tight, unforgiving bun. Her face was not a mask of grief. It was a mask of cold, theatrical, and utterly terrifying fury. "How can you all stand here and pretend?" she shouted, her voice shaking with a rage that seemed to come from the very center of the earth. It sliced through the sacred, sorrowful silence like a shard of glass. Every head turned. Every eye was on her. On me. She took a step forward, a prosecutor addressing a silent courtroom, and she pointed a single, trembling, accusatory finger directly at me. "How can you accept her sympathy?" she screamed, her voice rising with each word. "How can you let her touch you? This woman who calls herself my mother, she is the reason he is dead." A collective gasp went through the room. The air crackled with a horrified, electric disbelief. I stared at her, my daughter, my mind unable to process the words she was saying. This had to be a nightmare. A grief-induced delusion. "She did this," Olivia continued, her voice now a low, venomous hiss, dripping with a poison I had never known she possessed. For months, she complained about the burden of his illness. For months, she talked about how tired she was. He was an inconvenience to her, and so she took matters into her own hands. My mother is a murderer, and as of this moment, she took a deep, shuddering breath, her eyes blazing with a righteous, terrifying fire. "She is no longer welcome in my father's house. Get out!" Get out. The words echoed in the cavern of my heart. She was throwing me out. From my own home. My own daughter. On the day of my husband's funeral, while his body was still lying in the next room. The world tilted, the faces of my friends and family blurring into a kaleidoscope of pity, horror, and confusion. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared, trapped in this waking nightmare alongside me. "Did you hear me?" Olivia shrieked, taking a step towards me. I said, "Get out!" And in that moment, something inside me, some last flickering ember of fight, died. I could not process. I could not think. I could only obey. I turned, a wooden, unfeeling automaton, and I walked towards the front door. The crowd of mourners parted for me like the Red Sea, their faces averted, their shame and confusion a palpable wave of heat. I walked out the door of the home I had entered as a young bride, and I closed it softly behind me, leaving my life, my memories, and my husband's body behind. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Victoria. I'm 70 years old, and on the day my beloved husband was laid to rest, my only child accused me of being his killer and made me homeless in front of everyone I had ever known and loved. The secret I am sharing with you today is the most painful secret a mother can ever learn, the secret that you do not know your own child. You see, until that terrible moment, I believed my daughter and I had a perfect relationship. I believed she was a loving, devoted, and compassionate woman. The monster who stood in my living room and accused me of murder was a complete and utter stranger. For days, for weeks after that terrible afternoon, I was lost in a fog of confusion and heartbreak. Why? The question was a constant, tormenting drumbeat in my soul. Why would she do this? What had I missed? What had I done to create a child capable of such monstrous, unthinkable cruelty? I had no answers. I was just a grieving widow, a publicly shamed mother, a homeless woman, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart that had been shattered into a million pieces. But as the fog of my grief began to clear, it was replaced by a new, cold, and unfamiliar emotion: suspicion. And I began to realize that my daughter's impossible accusation was not an act of grief-stricken madness. It was an act of war. It was the first, brutal move in a cold, calculated, and terrifying game. And I, the grieving, broken victim, would have to find the strength to play. So please, join me on this terrible journey. This is a story about the ultimate betrayal and a mother's fight for the truth. Your support, your likes and subscriptions to Voices of the Forgotten are a quiet testament that you see me and that you believe me, even when my own child did not. To understand the monster who wore my daughter's face on that terrible day, you have to understand the perfect, loving, and utterly convincing angel she had pretended to be for her entire life. You have to understand the landscape of my love for her, a vast and beautiful country that I now realize was built entirely on a lie. My Olivia was not just my daughter, she was my masterpiece. From the moment she was born, she was a child of sunlight and laughter. My husband, Richard, and I adored her. Richard was a brilliant and successful architect, a man who designed soaring, beautiful buildings, but he always said that Olivia was his greatest creation. We were not just parents, we were her devoted, captivated audience. Our life was one of quiet, comfortable elegance. We lived in a beautiful home, the one she threw me out of, a home filled with books, art, and the sound of classical music. We gave Olivia everything, not in a material spoiling sense, but in a deeper way. We gave her our time, our attention, our unwavering support. We gave her a childhood that was a safe, beautiful, and meticulously tended garden. And she, in return, was the perfect flower. She was a brilliant student, a gifted pianist, a kind and compassionate friend. I remember her, at age 10, spending her entire summer allowance not on a new toy for herself, but on birdseed for the feeders in our backyard, because she was worried the birds would be hungry. I remember her, at 16, volunteering at the local hospital, reading to elderly patients, her youthful, vibrant presence a balm to their loneliness. She wrote us long, beautiful letters from college, letters filled with love and gratitude for the life we had given her. "I am who I am because of you and Dad," she wrote in one letter, "that I have kept for 30 years. You have taught me that the most important things in life are kindness, integrity, and love." She married a good, kind man, a lawyer named Ben, and she began a successful career of her own in art history. She was the perfect wife, the perfect professional, and most of all, the perfect daughter. She called me every single day. She never forgot a birthday or an anniversary. She would send me flowers for no reason at all. She was the sun in my sky, the steady, unwavering center of my world. The first shadow fell 5 years ago, when my Richard was diagnosed with a complex degenerative heart condition. The diagnosis was a devastating blow, the beginning of a long, slow, and painful goodbye. And through it all, Olivia was a rock. She was my angel of mercy. She took over the management of his care with a terrifying efficiency. She researched doctors, she scheduled appointments, she managed his complex medication regimen. She would sit by his bedside for hours, holding his hand, reading him poetry, her voice a low, soothing comfort. "Don't worry about a thing, Mom," she would tell me, her arm around my shoulder. "You just focus on loving him. I'll handle all the unpleasant details." And I, lost in my own sea of anticipatory grief, was so grateful. I saw her efficiency as a manifestation of her love. I saw her control as a sign of her strength. I willingly, gratefully, handed over the reins. I let her handle the bills, the insurance paperwork, the meetings with the estate lawyer. I was so consumed with the emotional labor of watching my husband die that I was relieved to be unburdened by the practicalities. I did not see that she was not just managing his death. She was managing his estate. Looking back now, through the cold, clear lens of her betrayal, I can see the tiny, almost invisible cracks in her perfect facade. They were small moments I had registered as odd but had immediately dismissed, explained away by the stress and the grief we were all under. There was the matter of the will. Richard's will was simple. He left everything to me, his wife of 50 years, with the understanding that upon my death, the estate would pass to Olivia. It was standard, straightforward, but I remember a conversation in the lawyer's office. Olivia had been unusually insistent on a particular point. We need to make sure there's a clear clause about what happens if my mother is incapacitated, she had said, her voice full of a false clinical concern. We need a clear line of succession for the power of attorney, just to make sure everything is protected. At the time, I had seen it as her being responsible, thinking ahead. I did not see it as her drawing a legal roadmap to my own disenfranchisement. Then there was the man, the one she had called her colleague. He began to appear in the last few months of Richard's life. A handsome, slick man in his late 40s named Marcus. He would drop her off at the house or pick her up. She explained that he was a financial advisor from her husband's law firm, helping her with some of the more complex aspects of the estate. It seemed plausible, but I remember one afternoon, I saw them in his car at the end of our street. They weren't talking. He was holding her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. It was an intimate gesture, not a professional one. When she came inside, I asked her about it. Her face had hardened for a split second, a flash of cold, reptilian anger, before it was replaced by a look of weary sadness. "Oh, Mom," she had sighed. "Marcus has been such a rock for me through all of this. He's just a good friend. You're reading too much into things." And I, ashamed of my own suspicious mind, had let it go. The final crack, the one that should have shattered my entire world but didn't, came a week before Richard died. He was lucid that day, his mind clear for the first time in weeks. Olivia was at work. It was just me and him. He was holding my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Be careful, Victoria," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle. "What do you mean, my love?" I asked. "The will," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, full of a desperate, urgent warning. "The power of attorney." She was so insistent. There is a hunger in her I have not seen before, a hardness. "Be careful." I had hushed him. I had told him he was tired, that he was imagining things. I had told him that Olivia was our angel, our rock. I could not bear to think otherwise. To believe him would have been to admit that my entire life, my entire understanding of my own child, was a lie. And so I chose my own comforting delusion over my dying husband's final, terrible truth. A week later, he was gone. And at his funeral, the angel I had so fiercely defended revealed herself to be the monster he had tried, with his last breath, to warn me about. His words came back to me now, a ghostly echo in the ruins of my life. "Be careful." There is a hunger in her. It was a hunger so vast, so ravenous, that it was willing to devour her own mother, to accuse her of murder, to throw her out into the street, all to get to the prize she felt she was owed. I had spent a lifetime teaching her about love, but she had been taking her own, secret lessons in the dark, brutal arts of greed and betrayal. And her graduation ceremony had been my husband's funeral. I walked. I don't know for how long. The manicured suburban streets of the neighborhood I had lived in for 50 years became a strange and hostile landscape. The familiar houses, the blooming rose bushes, the laughing children riding their bicycles. They all seemed to belong to another world, a world from which I had just been violently ejected. My feet, clad in the sensible low-heeled shoes I had chosen for a day of standing and greeting mourners, moved one in front of the other, but I had no destination. I was a ghost ship, my rudder shattered, adrift on an ocean of shock. The sun began to set, painting the sky in strokes of indifferent, beautiful pink and orange. The streetlights flickered on. I found myself standing in front of a small park, the one where I had pushed Olivia on the swings as a little girl, her delighted shrieks filling the air. I sank onto a cold, hard bench, the ironwork digging into my back. The chill of the evening air began to seep through my thin black dress, but I barely felt it. The cold inside me was so much more profound. My mind, a frantic, replaying loop of horror, kept returning to that moment in the living room. My daughter's face, twisted with a rage I had never seen. Her finger, pointing at me like a weapon. Her voice, a venomous shriek, echoing in the sacred silence of our grief. Murderer, dear. Get out. Murder cry. How? How'd we come to this? I sifted through the 50 years of my motherhood, searching for a clue, a wrong turn, a missed sign. Had I been a bad mother? Had I been too strict? Too lenient? Had I not loved her enough? Or had I loved her too much? The questions were a form of self-flagellation, a desperate attempt to find a reason, any reason, that would make sense of the unthinkable. Because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate, that I had done nothing wrong. That she was simply this monster. As darkness fell completely, a new practical fear began to pierce through the fog of my shock. I was homeless. I had no purse, no phone, no money. The keys to my car, my house, my entire life were in my handbag, sitting on a table in the home I was now forbidden to enter. It was in that moment of complete and utter desolation that a car pulled up to the curb beside my bench. The headlights blinded me for a moment. A door opened, and a voice I had known for 40 years, called my name. Victoria, my God, is that you? It was my neighbor and my dearest friend, Eleanor Vance. Not the lawyer from the other stories, but a different Eleanor. A woman with a heart as big as the sky and a spine of pure, unbendable steel. She was a retired judge, a widow herself, a woman who had sat with me through 1,000 cups of tea and 100 heartbreaks. She got out of the car and rushed to my side, her face a mask of horrified concern. She wrapped a warm cashmere shawl around my trembling shoulders. I saw you walk away, she said, her voice a low, angry hum. I couldn't believe it. I tried to go after you, but that daughter of yours blocked the door. She had 2 large men with her I'd never seen before. They wouldn't let anyone leave. What in God's name is going on? I opened my mouth to speak, but the only thing that came out was a dry, ragged sob, the first sound of grief I had allowed myself to make all day. Come on, she said, her voice softening, her arm a firm, steady presence around me. You're coming home with me. Eleanor's home was a mirror of my own, a place of quiet, elegant comfort. She sat me down in a soft armchair by the fire, wrapped me in a blanket, and put a glass of brandy into my shaking hands. She did not press me for details. She simply sat with me, her silent, unwavering presence a lifeline in the darkness. I stayed with her for 3 days, lost in a silent gray fog. I did not speak. I barely ate. I just sat, staring into the fire, while the machinery of my mind tried to reboot itself. Eleanor was a fortress around me. She answered the frantic phone calls from my so-called friends and family, her voice a cool, impenetrable wall of judicial authority. Victoria is safe, she would say. She is resting. She will not be taking any calls at this time. She did not, I noticed, receive a single call from Olivia. On the 4th morning, I woke up, and something had shifted. The fog had begun to lift, and in its place was a cold, hard, and terrifying landscape of reality. The grief was still there, a great, gaping wound in my soul. But beneath it, a new foundation was being laid. It was a foundation of cold, analytical thought. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was a victim of a crime, and I needed to understand the nature of that crime. I went downstairs and found Eleanor in her study, a beautiful, sun-filled room lined with law books. She was on the phone, her voice low and sharp. She looked up as I entered, and a look of relief washed over her face. "She's here," she said into the phone, and then hung up. "Good morning, Victoria," she said, her voice gentle. "I was just about to call in the cavalry." "I'm okay, Eleanor," I said, and I was surprised to find that my own voice was steady. "I need your help, not as a friend, as a judge." A slow, grim smile touched her lips. "I'm retired, my dear," she said. "But for you, I will gladly put the robes back on." "What's the first case on the docket?" "The state versus Olivia," I said. "And I am the prosecution, the lead witness, and the victim." For the next 2 hours, I laid out the case. I told her everything, not with the emotion of a grieving mother, but with the cold, precise detail of a witness giving testimony. I told her about the will, and Olivia's strange insistence on the incapacitated clause. I told her about the financial advisor, Marcus, and the intimate gesture I had witnessed. I told her about my husband's last, desperate warning. And I told her about the funeral, about the public accusation, about the 2 large unknown men who had been there to enforce my eviction. Eleanor listened, her face a mask of intense judicial concentration. She did not interrupt. She simply listened, her fingers steepled under her chin, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When I was finished, she was silent for a long time. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Okay," she said finally, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "This is not about grief. This is not about mess. This is a coup. A brilliantly planned, ruthlessly executed coup d'etat." "She thinks she's won," I said. "She thinks I am a broken, homeless old woman with no resources and no fight left in her." "And that," Eleanor said, her eyes gleaming with a cold, familiar fire I had seen her use on 100 arrogant lawyers in her courtroom, "is going to be her fatal mistake." Our counteroffensive began that afternoon. It was a quiet, secret war, fought not with anger, but with strategy. Our first objective was information. We needed to understand the battlefield. Eleanor's first call was to her own lawyer, a man who owed her a great many favors. She had him do a quiet, preliminary search on Olivia's colleague, Marcus Thorne. The results came back within an hour, and they were chilling. Marcus Thorne was not a financial advisor at Ben's law firm. He was a disbarred lawyer, struck off for embezzling client funds. He had a string of failed businesses and a reputation as a high-end con artist who specialized in romancing and defrauding wealthy, vulnerable women. He was not Olivia's colleague. He was her partner. Our second objective was to secure my assets, or what was left of them. Eleanor's lawyer filed an emergency motion to freeze all of my bank accounts and investment portfolios, the ones Olivia had been so kindly managing for me. The motion was granted, based on a sworn affidavit from me, detailing the events of the funeral and my subsequent homelessness. It was a temporary measure, but it was a crucial one. We had cut off her access to the cash. The third, and most dangerous, objective was to get inside the house. My house. I needed documents. I needed my husband's personal files, his diaries, the original copies of our wills. And I needed my handbag with my phone, my keys, my life. "She'll have changed the locks," I said. "Of course she has," Eleanor said with a grim smile. "But a lock is only as good as the door it's in. And I know a very good locksmith who is also a very bad poker player and owes me a great deal of money." The plan was set for that night. It felt like a scene from a spy movie. Eleanor drove us, parking her car a block away from my house. We sat in the darkness, watching. The house was brightly lit. A party seemed to be going on. Music was playing. Laughter drifted on the night air. A party in my home. 3 days after my husband's funeral. The sheer, monstrous audacity of it took my breath away. At 2 a.m, the lights finally went out. The last car drove away. We waited another hour, an hour that stretched for an eternity, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. Then we moved. Eleanor's locksmith, a small, wiry man who moved with the silence of a cat, met us at the back of the house. He took one look at the new, high-tech security system Olivia had installed and let out a low whistle. "She's not messing around?" he whispered. "Neither are we," Eleanor whispered back. It took him 20 minutes, 20 of the longest minutes of my life, but he got us in. We slipped into the dark, silent house, a house that was mine, and yet no longer mine. It smelled wrong. It smelled of her perfume, a heavy, cloying scent that had replaced the familiar, comforting smell of my husband's pipe tobacco and my lemon polish. We went straight to Richard's study. The room had been ransacked. His neat, orderly files were in disarray. His desk drawers were open. She had been looking for something, but she hadn't found it, because she didn't know where he kept the things that truly mattered. I went to the large, built-in bookcase that lined one wall. I ran my hand along the spines of a set of leather-bound first-edition Dickens novels, my husband's most prized possession. I found a copy of Great Expectations. I pulled it from the shelf. It was heavier than it should have been. I opened it. The center of the book had been hollowed out, a secret compartment my husband had created years ago. And inside, nestled in the hollowed-out pages, was everything. A small, black ledger, a series of letters tied with a ribbon, and a single, small, unlabeled key. I took the ledger and the letters. I didn't know what they were, but I knew they were important. I found my handbag, sitting on the hall table. I took a single, final look at the room, at the ghost of my life. Then we slipped back out into the night, as silently as we had come. Back in the safety of Eleanor's car, my hands trembling, I opened the ledger. The first page was in my husband's familiar, elegant handwriting. It read, "The Marcus Thorne file, for my Victoria. In the event that my deepest fears are realized." My husband, my brilliant, loving, and far-sighted husband, had known. He had seen the predator circling his family. And from his grave, he had just handed me the weapon I would need to destroy her. Back in the sanctuary of Eleanor's study, with the first light of dawn painting the sky outside, we opened the book that my husband had left for me from beyond the grave. It was not a diary. It was an intelligence dossier, a meticulously compiled file of evidence, a testament to a husband's love and a father's deepest fears. The ledger was filled with Richard's neat, architectural handwriting. It detailed every suspicious interaction he had observed between Olivia and Marcus Thorne. Dates, times, snippets of overheard conversations. He had noted Marcus's increasingly frequent visits, the way Olivia's demeanor changed when he was around, a new hardness in her eyes, a brittle, secretive excitement. He had documented the large sums of money Olivia had begun moving out of their joint accounts, transfers she had explained away as portfolio diversification and tax strategies. Richard, a man who could read a blueprint better than a novel, had seen the blueprint of his daughter's betrayal long before I had. He just didn't have the strength left to fight it. The letters were even more damning. They were love letters, of a sort. But the love they described was not for each other. It was for my money. They were written in a kind of code, a sickening, conspiratorial language of greed. "The old man is getting weaker," Olivia had written in one. "The asset will soon be ours to manage. The mother will be the only obstacle, but she is a sentimental fool. She will be easy to handle." In another, Marcus had written, "Patience, my love. Our ship is coming in. Once the estate is settled, we will be on a beach in the Caymans, and this dreary suburban life will be a distant memory. They were not just planning to steal from me. They were planning to erase me, to erase my entire life, and replace it with their own vulgar, sun-drenched fantasy." The final item in the hollowed-out book was the small, unlabeled key. "A safe deposit box," Eleanor said, her voice a low hum of anticipation. The next morning we went to the bank. The key, it turned out, was for a private box Richard had opened under a corporate name, a name I had never heard of. The bank manager, a man who had known my husband for years, looked at me with a sad, knowing pity. He led us into the vault. The box was heavy. We carried it into a small private viewing room and opened it. Inside, there was no money, no jewels. There was only a single, thick, sealed envelope. On the front, in my husband's hand, were the words, "My last will and testament, to be opened only by my wife, Victoria Miller, in the event of my death." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. This was not the will we had signed in the lawyer's office. This was a secret will, a ghost will, drafted and witnessed in secret, a final desperate move from a dying king to protect his kingdom from his own treacherous heir. The terms of this new will were a work of brutal legal genius. It began by formally and completely disinheriting Olivia. It laid out, in cold, precise detail, the reasons why, her relationship with Marcus Thorne, the suspicious financial transfers, her unseemly and predatory hunger. It then bequeathed the entire estate, all $9 million of it, to a newly created charitable foundation, the Richard Miller Foundation for Architectural Preservation. But here was the masterstroke, the move that was so quintessentially Richard, a man who believed in redemption as much as he believed in justice. The will stipulated that I, his wife, was to be the salaried, lifelong director of this foundation. And it offered Olivia one, and only one, path back into the family. If, and only if, she immediately and completely severed all ties with Marcus Thorne, if she entered into a minimum of 1 year of intensive psychotherapy, and if she volunteered for 5 years at a local homeless shelter, then, and only then, would the board of the foundation, a board to be chaired by me and my friend, Judge Eleanor Vance, consider granting her a modest yearly stipend. He was not just disinheriting her. He was giving her a roadmap back to her own soul. The final document in the box was a detailed report from a private investigator Richard had hired. It was a complete, devastating biography of Marcus Thorne, including his real name, his criminal record, and a list of the other wealthy, vulnerable women he had defrauded. I sat there, in the cold, silent vault, the papers spread out before me, and I finally understood. My husband had not been a fool. He had not been blind. He had been a trapped, dying man, trying to save his family from the grave. And he had trusted me, his sentimental fool of a wife, to be the one to execute his final, terrible, and loving plan. "Well," Eleanor said, her voice full of a grim, righteous satisfaction, "I believe we have everything we need to go to war." The final confrontation was not a public spectacle. It was a quiet, private execution. Eleanor's lawyer, a man with the cold, dead eyes of a shark, arranged a meeting at his office. The stated purpose of the meeting was to discuss the terms of my incapacitation and the transfer of the power of attorney to Olivia. It was the bait, and she took it hook, line, and sinker. She arrived with Marcus Thorne at her side. They walked into the conference room, their faces alight with a smug, triumphant greed. They saw me, a small, sad-looking old woman in a black dress, and Eleanor, my meddling but ultimately harmless old friend. They thought they were walking into their victory celebration. They were in fact walking into their own funeral. We let them talk. We let them lay out their plans for my future, my care, the management of my assets. They spoke in soft, concerned, and utterly false tones. It was a nauseating performance. When they were finished, Eleanor's lawyer, Mr. Croft, a different Croft, but no less terrifying, simply smiled. A slow, cold, and deeply unpleasant smile. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne, Mrs. Miller," he said. "That was a very illuminating presentation. Now, I believe my client has a presentation of her own." I did not speak. I simply pushed a file across the vast, polished mahogany table. It was the dossier on Marcus Thorne. He opened it. His tanned, handsome face went pale. His smug smile vanished, replaced by the slack-jawed look of a man who has just seen a ghost. Then, I pushed a second file across the table. It contained the transcripts of the letters between him and Olivia. Olivia snatched them up. As she read her own words, her own treacherous, greedy, and hateful words, a low, guttural sound escaped her throat. It was the sound of a creature in a trap. Finally, I pushed the third and final document across the table. The secret will. My husband's final, devastating verdict on the daughter he had once adored. Olivia read it, her body trembling, her face a crumbling mask of disbelief and horror. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. She was not looking at her mother. She was looking at her executioner. "How?" she whispered, the word a dry, ragged gasp. "He knew," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of 50 years of love and a universe of pain. "Your father knew. He saw the monster you had become. And he loved you enough to try and save your soul, even after you had so thoroughly broken his heart." Marcus Thorne, the slick, confident con artist, stood up. He tried to bluster, to threaten, to talk his way out of the airtight, legal coffin we had built for him. But his words were empty, pathetic. He was a defanged snake. He turned and walked out of the room, out of my daughter's life, and I later learned, out of the country. But Olivia did not move. She just sat there, staring at her father's words, at the undeniable proof of her own monstrous betrayal. And she began to weep. Not the false, theatrical tears she had shed at the funeral. These were the real tears. The terrible, racking, and soul-destroying sobs of a person who has just been forced to look at the absolute, ugly truth of who they are. She was not weeping for the money she had lost. She was weeping for the father whose love she had betrayed, for the mother whose heart she had shattered, and for the soul she had so casually and so completely sold for nothing. The war was over. So what is the final lesson from this story of a mother's heartbreak? It is that the deepest betrayals often come from the ones we love the most. We are so blinded by our love, by the beautiful story we have told ourselves about who our children are, that we refuse to see the strangers they have become. We make excuses. We look away. We choose our comforting delusions over the hard, painful truth. But the truth, eventually, will have its say. And sometimes, it speaks in the voice of a dying husband, in the pages of a secret will. I also learned that grief can be a strange and powerful crucible. It can shatter you, yes. But it can also burn away the non-essential parts of you, leaving behind a core of pure, unbendable steel. I walked out of my home a victim. But I walked back in a survivor. A warrior. A woman who had been to hell and back, and had returned with her head held high. My life is quiet now. I live alone in my beautiful, silent house. It is a house haunted by ghosts, the ghost of my beloved husband, and the ghost of the daughter I thought I had. Olivia did not take the path her father offered her. She did not choose redemption. She chose to disappear. I have not heard from her since that day in the lawyer's office. I do not know if I ever will. Some part of me, the foolish, stubborn mother in me, prays for her every night. But the other part of me, the part that sat on a cold park bench with a shattered heart, knows that some betrayals are too deep to be mended. I am the director of the Richard Miller Foundation now. It is my work, my purpose. We fund scholarships for young, struggling architecture students. We help to preserve the beautiful historic buildings that my husband so loved. I am surrounded by his legacy, by his belief in the enduring power of beauty and integrity. It is a good life, a quiet life, a life of peace. And sometimes, on a quiet evening, I will take out his secret will, and I will read the last line he ever wrote to me, the line that was written at the bottom of the page, a final ghostly whisper from the man I will love until the day I die. It reads, "Be happy, my Victoria. You have earned it." And I am. Thank you for sitting with me through this long and difficult story. It has been a story of great sorrow, but also, I hope, of a quiet, enduring strength. The strength to face the truth, no matter how terrible it may be. If my story has given you a measure of comfort, or a renewed sense of your own inner strength, a like, or a subscription to Voices of the Forgotten would be a great gift. Remember that the truth, like a well-built house, has a strong foundation. It will stand even when the storms of lies and betrayal try to tear it down. Trust in the truth, and trust in yourself. You are stronger than you know. I'll see you in the next story. Love, Grandma Victoria.